So our talk tonight is on the Aztecs. So to start my talk, I want to clarify something, and that is this: there's no such thing. There was never a population of people who called themselves the Aztecs. They called themselves the Mexica, M-E-X-I-C-A, which looks shockingly like Mexico because that's where we get the word Mexico from. The Mexica never called themselves the Aztecs. They said they were from Aztlan, A-T-Z-L-A-N, Aztlan, and what happened was, about 150 years ago, anthropologists in some Ivy League school in the northeastern part of the United States decided they were sick of writing Mexica and then talking about Mexican society. So it's M-E-X-I-C-A-N. It looks like Mexican, and they couldn't differentiate then between pre-Columbian Mexico and post-Columbian Mexico. And so they came up with a new term, and EC on the end of something indicates that you're a people. So they took Aztlan, the place that the Aztecs said they were from, and made Aztec so that they could get away from using Mexica. So that's the place that I wanted to start with, just so that you knew that Aztec isn't a real thing. Having said that, because Aztec is so stuck in our heads, I will probably use Aztec and Mexica interchangeably, just because I'm in the habit of saying Aztec. Like it's not something that I've tried to delete. It's what we say, it's how we think of them, so there's no point in trying to undo this. Another thing that's worth talking about is the pronunciation. So what I've noticed is a lot of people will say Mexica, S-H. I'm saying Mexica, and here's why. When the Spanish conquered Mexico, the X at the time made the Ch sound. The Arabs had been in Spain for 781 years at the point that the Spanish finally ejected the Arabs. The Spanish language was a hybrid language of Arabic and Latin mixed. In the early 1500s, the Spanish decided to de-Arabize the language. And they actually sat down with a dictionary and started purging words, going, this is too Arabic, get rid of it, get rid of it. They failed at some level because probably somewhere around 30% of Spanish words are still Arabic words, right? They didn't completely purge the language. The Portuguese did a much better job during their linguistic purge. And so there's a lot less Arabic in Portuguese, but Spanish still ended up with a big chunk of it. While they're doing this, they decided they should delete the ch sound from Spanish because they thought ch was too much of an Arabic sound, and they could become a little bit less Arab if they didn't have the sound in their language. So in Greek, the letter X, it's spelled, we usually spell C-H-I, most Americans call it chi, is the letter chi, and it's the sound that you put in the word drachma, right? It's a Greek sound. CH in German makes the ch sound, so the word Buch or the word ich, those are using that ch. So in other words, it's not that ch is exclusively an Arabic sound, it's in multiple languages, including multiple European languages. It's just the Spanish were really sensitive to the idea that they were Arab, and they hated the idea they were Arab, and they wanted to make sure that everybody knew they weren't, and that's why they did this. Well, they switched the X then from cha to ha, and that's why it's Mexico, not Mexico today, right? So that's why I'll be using the X when I pronounce the X, I'll be saying cha for all the words that I'm using that have X in it. And for the record, the Aztecs loved the X, so it's going to come up a bit. So now that we got that out of the way, I want to actually sort of lay the foundation. When I was an undergrad, the dominant, actually even when I was a grad student, the dominant understanding for how human migration to North and South America took place was, of course, we crossed the Bering Land Bridge and then populated North America and South America. The question was when, not really if. And most anthropologists sort of settled on somewhere in the time frame between 11,000 years ago and 16,000 years ago. So one of my professors, Dr. Ken Brown, this drove him nuts. And it drove him nuts for multiple reasons. One of the reasons was the amount of technology that the Native American population had around 16,000 years ago. And his argument was there was no way they could have come to North America 16,000 years ago and then instantaneously generated this level of tech. They needed time to generate the tech. And so he kept arguing that it was probably around 22,000 years ago when the Native Americans began crossing the Bering Land Bridge. And he was right. We now have a lot of evidence that indicates that, in fact, the populating of North and South America began probably somewhere around 22,000 years ago. The populating of North and South America is really tricky because, first of all, the reason why people move is when you were doing gathering and hunting. So all your food was generated by occasionally killing an animal. Once a week, once every 10 days, the men would go out and hunt every day with the understanding that they wouldn't even actively try to kill an animal. That part of what hunting was in gathering and hunting bands was surveying the land, figuring out what animals were available, looking at the balance, seeing if there were injured animals, and then a lot of planning. So the men would go out every day, but with the understanding that maybe once a week they'd come back with something. Gathering end of this was that the women would stay close to camp and they would pick up the vegetables, the nuts, the berries in the area, and then you would have your diet some mix of those two things. We think that the average gathering and hunting band probably was about 80% vegetable matter and fruit, and then maybe 20% meat in terms of their caloric intake. In that system, life is relatively easy. You work maybe 2 hours a day, both genders, and the rest of your day you spend sleeping and eating and dancing and telling stories and hanging out. In other words, our species has been around for 450,000 years. Didn't really start doing anything interesting until maybe 14,000 years ago. So our species basically hung out for 436,000 years doing a bunch of nothing. Maybe some cave paintings here and there and some graffiti or something, but nothing really exciting or interesting because life was good. Our life expectancy was decent. We had medicine. The foods we ate were generally really good varieties of foods, so we were healthy. The problem was our population was constantly, gradually expanding. The good thing was the planet was big. So when your population got to a point where the carrying capacity on the land for gathering and hunting technology had been exceeded, there were too many people, there was not enough calories, you just simply moved. You went to a new part of the world. You'd split your group in half, and half would take off and half would stay behind. You'd do some arrangement to keep pushing the excess population away. But because this is such a slow process, it takes thousands of years to populate Africa. Then it takes thousands of years to populate Asia. And then it takes thousands of years to populate North and South America. And so the way to think of the populating of the continents is somebody started in Alaska and ran as fast as they could to the southern tip of Chile. It took thousands and thousands and thousands of years of slow, gradual, lazy populating. But at some point, we reach this threshold where we filled the planet. But because North and South America go last, it means that we get to that threshold point in North and South America later than we did in the rest of the world. Sometime around 12,000 years ago, agriculture is developed in Iraq. In other words, by about 12,000 years ago, the population of Asia had reached its limit and people started to have to do agriculture. For North and South America, that point doesn't happen until 9,000 years ago. In other words, North and South America are basically 3,000 years behind because of the population pressure effect. So right away, that means that the North and South American populations are technologically at a disadvantage when we do finally make contact with each other 500 years ago. But it's not as pronounced as you think. And that's one of the things I want to talk about as we go through this. Having said that, those populations that were coming across the Bering Land Bridge were probably following big game movements and hunting. Now, when I say big game, I don't mean they were hunting mastodons. I suspect that happened, but it happened very infrequently. Here's the scenario I want you to do if you think that they were hunting mastodons. So, get a big SUV probably, maybe something bigger. It needs to be bigger than a pickup truck. Garbage truck, that's it. Get a garbage truck, you and your friends, you can do this as an experiment. One of you gets a spear. Make it out of metal because wood isn't gonna last against a garbage truck. The guy with the steel spear is gonna plant his foot in the street with the spear against his foot. Then the guy with the garbage truck is gonna drive at top speed at the guy with the spear. And what the guy with the spear has got to do is hold it there in place so at a moment of impact, this goes into the engine block. Most people aren't going to stay there. Most people are going to see that mastodon coming for them, and they're going to be like, I'm not doing this. I don't care how hungry the people are, and they're going to throw their spear down and run like hell. Because it's not logical. We have found mastodons who were in fact butchered. They were always trapped first, not hunted. So for example, they fell into a tar pit and then we jumped in there and carved them up. So when I say hunting big game, I don't mean mastodons. I mean they were probably hunting stuff that was a little bit on the smaller side. Because North and South America did have those animals. One of the things that a lot of anthropologists have put forward as a hypothesis is that the Native American population ended up causing those animals to go extinct. I'm dubious. I don't see why it would have happened. I'm not sure if they just simply had the hunting capacity to cause mass extinction event. I suspect those animals mostly went extinct for other reasons. Having said that, it sets the Native American population up for a really difficult task. So there are multiple food sources in North America. I'm going to focus on North America. I keep saying North America and South America, but I'm just going to focus on North America. So we're doing the Aztecs, so I'm just going to stick to here. So one of the food sources, for example, is magueys. So those big century plants like agave. And what you can do with a maguey is you can cut it open and there's a heart in the middle. It's a really starchy, very fibrous center. And what you can do is cut it into slices and then you chew it for hours and hours and hours and hours. And as you chew it, you will slowly get some of the calories out and you can swallow that and you will get input. But like as a food supply, no, nobody's gonna do that on purpose. Later on, the Aztecs realized if you just stab it, put a bowl next to where you stabbed it, wait for the plant to slowly die. As it's dying, its sugars would start to ferment and you could have an alcoholic beverage out of it and have some fun. So that was a sort of an upgrade. The other thing Aztecs realized is if you took the fibers, you could make it into like a mat, and then you could use it for shoes. So if you can imagine you're eating a substance that you could also use for shoes, not at the top of your list for foods to eat. Another thing that's on the table is amaranth. Amaranth seeds are fantastic, but they're bitter. And so and they're small, and it takes a lot of effort to make a meal out of them. So there are things out there that you can eat, but it's not the stuff that you want to be eating. The foods that you wanted to be eating are squash and beans. That was what was available. And so what would happen, squash and beans were awesome because once you start doing early agriculture, roughly about 9,000 years ago, you could plant your squash on the ground and then the beans want to go up. And so they're not interfering with each other. They're occupying two separate spaces, but on the same piece of land. So you can grow both at the same time. The problem is you need something for them to go up. And what the Native Americans noticed was there was a grass that had a thick stalk. It wasn't very tall. It got up a little ways. And so if you planted the grass with that, you could get the beans to go up that. And so they began doing this. They had those three plants. Well, then they added a fourth plant into the mix. It was gourds. Because gourds not only have a kind of hard shell, that doesn't rot very quickly, it rots very slowly. It's also waterproof. So what you would do is you'd cut the top off on the gourd. In fact, they probably started using gourds even before they started doing agriculture. You'd cut the top off on the gourds, take its seeds and throw them. You've just now spread the plant. There'll be more gourds next year. And you're probably selective about which gourds you're doing this with. You're probably picking the bigger ones. So that's probably the first plant that got domesticated because we're selecting instead of natural selection. That's the definition of domestication. We're changing the DNA by selectively replanting the plants we like, right? Or breeding the animals we like. So we domesticate the gourd. And then what you can do is you can take the seeds from squash, because you eat the squash, but then you got all these seeds. Well, the seeds are amazing. They're packed full of protein and calories. So you jam them into the gourd, you close the gourd off, you bury it in the ground, and then you come back in the winter, and this is how you're going to get through the winter, is eating the squash seeds. What eventually happens is they start to take interest in that grass with the thick, stiff stalk that was kind of tall, because it had seeds on it that you could eat. The seeds were on a little stem, and there were 6 or so on each, and each one had a husk around it. So it was kind of a pain. You'd have to peel the husk off of each seed individually, and there were just 6. So you weren't getting much in terms of calories off of the thing, but it's something. And so they began paying attention to this plant. And eventually, as time went by, they began to select the plants that had more kernels on them. And eventually they bred it so it had one husk around it. And that's how we domesticated corn. Corn is the 4th in the series of those plants. And then that made it really amazing, because now you've got the squash on the ground with the gourds, and then you've got the beans going up the corn, and then you've got the corn producing corn cobs that you can get a lot of calories off of. And so that becomes the basis for Native American diets. In Mexico, where the domestication of corn took place, another thing they began to do was domesticate corn so it could grow at different altitudes, because it became really useful as a food supply. So very quickly, people at higher altitudes began looking for ways to bring corn up to them. And we altered corn so that you could grow it at higher altitudes. And of course, the high altitude place I want to focus on is the Valley of Mexico. The Valley of Mexico, I think Mexico City's official elevation is something like 7,350 feet. It's like 1.4 miles above sea level. So as far as major cities on the planet, it is the tallest massive metropolis, the highest massive metropolis on the planet. It's inside a valley, but the valley is 7,300 feet in the air. So It's really crazy. Like, we were always like, ooh, Denver, the Mile High City. Yeah, you got nothing on the Mexico City. The Valley of Mexico, actually, you want to throw the map up? Let's get a sense of what we're talking about. All right, so this isn't all of Mexico. The top was chopped off, but I couldn't be picky with the maps I found on Wiki Commons. One of the reasons I really like this map is, first of all, it gives you a sense of how mountainous Mexico is. I think when most people think of Mexico, they think of, coastal cities and really lovely beaches. Mexico is a giant mountain range. Obviously, the Yucatan Peninsula is shockingly flat. That's mostly tropical rainforest, but by the time you get into the northwest corner, it's actually officially desert. So the Yucatan Peninsula goes from desert, where Chicxulub is, the meteor impact that killed the dinosaurs, that's in the top left-hand corner, the top northwest corner of the Yucatan Peninsula. That's where it is. I've actually been in it, it's kind of cool. There's a town called Merida there. I really liked Merida. It's totally worth going, just so you can say, I've been in the crater that killed the dinosaurs. Well, not all of them, but most of them, right? Because birds are dinosaurs. Dinosaurs didn't go extinct. It's just most dinosaurs went extinct. The birds made it. So, cool. Anyway, but you can see so the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is where Mexico is at its skinniest, right? So if you look right there, that's that narrow spot. That's also a great cultural marker for Mexico. So to the west of that is the Aztecs, the Tarascanos, the Tlaxcalanos. To the east of that is the Maya. That's the Maya cultural zone. So Mexico does own some Maya territory. Chiapas, Tabasco, Quintana Roo, Yucatan, that's Maya. But then everything west of the isthmus, that's the cultural zone I'm going to be focusing on because I want to talk about the Aztecs, and they're to the west. In fact, the orange is the Aztec Empire. So when you look at it, you realize, wow, it's just a fraction the size of Mexico. Mexico is so much bigger than the Aztec Empire. Isn't that crazy how small it actually is? Just occupies what is that, maybe 15% of Mexico today. It's tiny, and it had holes in it. It had 3 holes in it, in fact. One of those holes was on purpose, the Tlaxcalano. The other 2 holes the Aztecs never quite could finish them off, so they were stuck with this territory that wasn't theirs. Anyway, all right, so you got this in the background. What happens is, when you're doing agriculture in this time period, so we're talking 9,000 years ago to about 2,000 years ago, that 7,000 year span of time, agriculture in Mexico was really tricky to pull off because the way they would do it is they would do slash and burn. They would go into the forest, and you can't set a forest, especially if it's tropical rainforest, you can't set it on fire. It's green, it's not gonna burn. I mean, obviously our forests burn like crazy today, but that might have something to do with the stupid way we mismanage our forests and global warming. So let's set aside the fact that we're living in tinder boxes today. Then, when things were a little healthier and the planet wasn't in such distress, you couldn't just go set a forest on fire. So what you would have to do is you'd have to do a little bit of planning. So let's say there's an area that you think is big enough that if you plant it, you'll be able to support your family. You go out there. This is a Stone Age society with a stone. Now you can take 2 stones and smack them together and make a sharp edge with your stone. So you've got a sharp edge on the stone, and you're gonna walk over to the first tree, and you're gonna scrape the bark off all the way around the tree and try and get into the wood a little bit. Your knuckles are gonna be bloody, your arms are gonna be sore. Then you go to the next tree and do this again, next tree and do this again. And the reason you're doing this, by the way, if you've ever wanted to kill a tree, I've just given you the method for killing one. It turns out that trees transport their liquid intake through the part of the wood that's right next to the bark. So if you go all the way around a tree, cutting that off, that tree can't get water anymore, it will die. And then you do this to the whole forest. Then you come back the next year after that section of forest is dead, because now it's dry, now you set it on fire. You wait for the fire to burn through. Now you've got an open field. You take your seeds, you walk out there and you plant them in the ash. And then you look up to Tlaloc, the god of rain, and you go, man, I sure could use some rain right now. And pray like crazy that Tlaloc delivers. And if Tlaloc's busy, I guess you're out of luck. And you're gonna be eating something else. Good luck. Maybe the bark that you peeled off? Anyway, so in that system, there's a really big problem. So first of all, if you're gathering and hunting, for every calorie, obviously it depends on where you're living and the availability of food. So this is just sort of a generalization, probably a made-up generalization. For every calorie you put out, you'll get about 10 back. So in terms of work reward, gathering and hunting is amazing for an individual because you're hardly putting in any effort to get all these calories back. Your trick in gathering and hunting is to have no impact on your environment. So if you're eating deer meat, you want to make sure not to thin the deer herd too much. If you're eating wild carrots, you don't want to eat so many that there's not enough to create the seeds to have a bunch of carrots next year. In other words, your goal in gathering and hunting is to have no impact on the environment. You want to be invisible. Maybe, if you're a good steward, you're even like actively thinking it through like, oh, I should thin that herd. It's getting a little bit big. It probably is in trouble. Or I need to be really careful. That herd got a little thin and I need to take care of it. And so good gatherer and hunters would do stuff like that maybe, but otherwise you don't want any real impact. Agriculture is the opposite. Your goal is to completely transform the landscape because what you're trying to do is maximize the calories, not for every calorie you put in, but the calories per acre. Because the reason you're switching to agriculture isn't because it's a better system, it's terrible. Nobody would willingly do agriculture if gathering and hunting was an option. You're doing it because your population has exceeded the carrying capacity of gathering and hunting. And now you have a choice. You can kill Junior or let Junior starve to death, or maybe kill an elder so that Junior doesn't have to. So you go get your parents and zap them so your kids can live. These are terrible options. Nobody's going to willingly do this. In fact, if you walked up to a parent and said, kill your parent or kill your kid because somebody isn't going to eat, they'll be like, is there another option? Like, for example, maybe I could work harder. They will do it. And that's why we slowly begin to do agriculture. We do it kicking and screaming. We don't like it. It's terrible. It's a huge amount of work, and it has a lot of really ugly negative consequences. It's why it took us over 400,000 years to start doing it. It wasn't because we were stupid and couldn't figure it out. We figured it out the first time we threw a bunch of seeds out. We came back and we're like, wow, look, there's a bunch of my favorite plant growing here. Oh, plants come from seeds. Ooh, I could deliberately plant these. Sounds like a lot of really terrible work. Screw that. And then you go off and kill a rabbit and eat some berries. And you're happy. One of the consequences is the return on your effort is less. For every calorie you put in, you get 4 back now with agriculture. In other words, you're working a lot harder. Another problem with it is you're now suddenly really dependent on the rain, something you have no control over. Which is why praying to Tlaloc is going to really soothe your soul, because you're going to be like, wow, I have no control. So if I have a God that has control and I plead to that God, it'll give me a sense of control. So, okay, cool. But then there's another problem. I can't just pick up and leave. Because if I leave, somebody else can come harvest my crop. Or Bambi and Thumper show up and eat my crop. And I don't want that to happen. So now I'm tied to my piece of land. I'm stuck here. But it gets worse. Remember I set that forest on fire and I planted my seeds in the ash? Well, every year I grow my crop in that land, because they didn't have sophisticated fertilizers back then, and they didn't have the concept of crop rotation. Every year I plant my crop in that land, I diminish its nutrient value by about 10%. It's not that in 10 years it'll be zero. It's a geometric curve. It's an exponential curve that goes towards zero. So it'll go 90 on your second year, 81 on your third year, 73, 66, you see the pattern, 59. It's 10% of what you produce that you're shrinking. So you'll never get to zero, but by about year 11, you're like 39%. At some point, you'll reach the point where you're not feeding your family, and it's probably not year 11. It's probably like year 2 or 3 or 4, right? Like let's say you could feed your family with 80%. So then that means you could get year 1 at 100%, year 2 at 90, and year 3 at 81. Because maybe you need 40% to eat that before the winter and then 40% to store to get through the winter. So when you get to the next year, year 4, and you're at 73%, you're really hungry by the end of winter. You're like, oh, that was bad. So you have to abandon your land. For every year you don't grow a crop on that land, for every year you did grow a crop on that land, you need 10 years of fallow time. You need 10 years for that land to have no crop production on it for it to recover. So if you produced 1 year worth of crop on that land, you have to wait 10 years for it to recover. If you did 2 years, you gotta wait 20 years. If you did 3 years, you gotta wait 30 years. In other words, I need about 11 times as much land than I need to be harvesting, because I'm gonna harvest about 1/11 or about 9% at any given moment. The rest of it's all gonna be fallow. And by fallow, I mean I'm letting the trees grow back. I'm letting the soil completely recover. So if I grew my crop for 2 years and and I'm going to go back to that farm field in 20 years, I'm going to have 20-year-old trees that I now got to get rid of. So there I am with my stone scraping the bark off so I can kill the trees so they can dry out, so the next year I can set them on fire. Now that makes another problem. If my neighbors are hungry, what's to stop them from raiding? Or what's to stop them from going and taking over one of my fields that I have fallow? In other words, switching to agriculture creates a problem because now I have an odd relationship with the people around me. And that's not all. When we were doing gathering and hunting, this season I'm eating that plant, and that season I'm eating this next plant, and I'm constantly moving so that I don't impact the environment. And also, there are different plants at different elevations that are ripening at different times, so I have a variety in my diet. It turns out our species really likes variety. It turns out our species doesn't do so well when you eat the same food over and over and over and over again. We start to run into health problems. So switching over to agriculture means I'm eating the same food over and over again. To make things worse, when I was doing gathering and hunting, there was a lot of medicine available because one of the things that the women do is they're constantly trying new plants to see what's edible and what's not. And in the process, they're like, when I ate that bark, my headache went away. Let's try that again. You punch somebody in the head, give them the bark, go, is the pain gone? Oh, I think I figured something out. But when you switch over to agriculture, you don't want that plant around because it's taking up land that you could be growing your high-calorie food on. And so medicine is going to at least take a hit, if not go bye-bye. And so all of a sudden, all these ailments that you were treating with all these random plants is off the table. And then to make things worse, corn. Now, wheat and rice are also issues, right? Rice is a very water demanding plant, And in wheat, you basically let it dry out and you have to grind it. Corn has an extra problem, and it's the shell around each, not the husk, the shell around each kernel. If you just eat corn off the cob, you can see it the next day because our digestive system can't get through that shell. So I need to do something to that shell so I can get to the calories inside that kernel. Today, that's not a problem for us because our problem is we have too many calories. But back then, this was a problem because the problem was they had too few calories. And so what they had to do was come up with ways to get around that shell. There are two ways. One, you can actually literally soak it in acid and let the acid take out the shell. The other thing you can do is you can let the corn dry, and then you take a mano and a matate, right? And you put the dry corn in between, and you grind it. And then you take the ground corn and you turn it into a tortilla. And then you eat the tortilla. There's a problem with that. If I take 2 stones and I grind something in between the 2 stones, I'm not just grinding the thing in between the 2 stones, I'm grinding the 2 stones. And then that gets into the material I'm about to eat. So when you eat bread, because we do this with wheat too, or when you eat tortillas, it's like eating sandpaper, and you will slowly destroy the enamel on your teeth, and eventually you won't have teeth. So in other words, going to agriculture was not something anybody happily did. This was a mess. But it does mean we're going to have to rethink the way we do everything. And so, can you do the Valley of Mexico, Joey? I caught you off guard. By the way, you see that lake in the middle? That's what we're zooming in on. So the Valley of Mexico, I already told you, had a really high elevation. In the center of the Valley of Mexico is this massive saltwater lake. The lake actually has like 2 or 3 parts. Yeah. So the big piece is Lake Texcoco, and you can see that there's other names on there. There's Lake Xochimilco, right? I'm just going to call the lake Lake Texcoco and not deal with the fact that the different parts have different names just to simplify our lives. So the Valley of Mexico is completely ringed by mountains. It's at a really high elevation, which causes an agricultural problem. It means it's cold, which means that your growing season is shrunk. Now, it turns out there's another issue. If I have plentiful water, then my plants will grow rapidly. But if I have low amount of water, my plants are going to be stunted and they're going to grow slower. So I got to get them to harvest. And to do that, I'm going to need fresh water. To make things a little bit more interesting, if the ground is dry and we get a light freeze, my plants will die. They'll freeze. But if the ground is wet enough, it's hard for the ground to freeze if it's wet enough. So I can be protected a little bit by a little bit of moisture in my land from a light freeze. So I can actually get a little bit extra of a growing season if I have water. The Valley of Mexico is not a wet place. So what ended up happening is people settled in a ring around the Valley of Mexico in a very narrow band because the Lake Texcoco was salt water. So they couldn't use it for irrigation. And then if you got too close, too high in elevation into the mountains, it was too cold and your growing season was too short. You'd never get your crop through. So by the time they were done, there was just this little strip of land that was useful in the valley where you could grow corn, beans, and squash. Otherwise, the land was pretty useless. This worked just fine until the population of the valley reached that threshold point where they were past the carrying capacity. And in that moment, they had to ask themselves the question that nobody wants to ask: who's gonna die? Oh no, how do I get around this by work? That's the question. And here's what their solution was about 2,100 years ago. A group of people decided that, see where it says Teotihuacan up in the top right-hand corner? There was a big swamp there, big massive swamp filled with these really big trees. Somebody got the idea to basically go through the valley and and conquer it. Or maybe talk them into it. Because I'm not sure that anybody conquered anybody. It might have been somebody was charismatic and went and talked them into it. And they brought a huge portion of the population of the valley to Teotihuacan, to that big swamp. When they got there, the plan was to clear the swamp and turn it into farmland that would solve their water problem. The problem is, well, there's two problems. One, there's these giant trees in the swamp, so that was labor intensive to pull the trees out. But then the next part is, it's too wet. Your plants will rot. So the people who figured this out realized if you took and dredged canals through the swamp, the material in the canal, if you stacked it in the middle of the canals that you're dredging, you would raise the bed out of the water, and then you could plant the bed. And then by the end of the year, the bed will have slowly been eroding. Plant life from leaves falling and just sort of nature happening would slowly fill up your trenches. And then that would mean for the next year, you're going to have to go in there and dredge your trenches. You take the material from the trenches and you put them back on the mound where you did your original growing. Well, that stuff's really crazy fertile. So you've just refertilized your planting platform, so you don't have to let it go fallow for 10 years. You can keep growing your crop on the same exact spot over and over and over again. And so, in other words, they've suddenly figured out a way to have a massive chunk of land dedicated to food production that they can just keep in play all the time. But then, they're looking at this pile of trees they've pulled out. Big pile of junk that they didn't need. Boulders and trees, just stuff that was in the way of making these big farms that they wanted to make, that they've piled up. And somebody went, let's do something with it. And they went and they cut stone, and they stacked the stone around this giant debris pile, this giant garbage dump, and they turned it into the pyramids of the sun and the pyramids of the moon. And we think they did this all in one shot. And they made a town. And in the process now, they've got these floating gardens where they're producing massive amounts of calories. They've got 2 big pyramids that they can worship their gods at. And they've solved all sorts of problems. And that becomes sort of the first major population center to take off in the Valley of Mexico. And as a result, they're going to get to lay some of the foundation, the religious foundation, for the beliefs that the Aztecs are going to inherit. But here, I'm going to throw something into this. So we haven't even gotten to the Aztecs yet because I'm trying to lay the foundation. The Aztecs don't start to create an empire until 1427. Cortez is 1519. The Aztec Empire only lasted 92 years. The Aztecs are late. When I'm talking about Teotihuacan, when the Aztecs were looking at the Temple of the Moon and the Temple of the Sun, they were going, wow, this thing is so old. When the Aztecs were making their empire in 1427, they were looking at this thing going, man, it's 1,500 year old. This is ancient. These temples are ancient. One thing that's worth pointing out, just because I like these kind of connections and I'm always looking for them. So I told you, agriculture came about 3,000 years late to North and South America because the population pressure wasn't there to force it. Well, the Temple of the Sun and the Temple of the Moon were built about 2,700 years after Egypt built the step pyramid. So it's right on schedule, development-wise. Apparently, there is this step that civilizations take long after agriculture goes into effect, they take this step. It could be that there's a surplus of food, and that's why they take this step. But that doesn't seem to be the case in Teotihuacan. They were in trouble. That's why they did this, and then they took the step. So the idea that surplus of food is what leads to the construction of pyramids May have been the case in Egypt, but it wasn't probably the case here. Before I go on, I want to talk about the religion. The religion and the calendar. We'll do both at the same time. So there were two calendars that the Aztecs ran. And they inherited this. They didn't make these up, but they used them and they liked them. So one of the calendars had 18 20-day months. So 18 times 20 is 360. Which meant their calendar was flawed because it was missing 5.24 days, because a year is 365.24 days, right? But they didn't care. That was their calendar and they liked it. And they used it. They ran a second calendar at the same time, and it had 13 20-day months. 13 times 20 is 260. That calendar was off by 105 days. But strangely enough, the two calendars intersected every 52 years. Every 52 years, the two calendars had the same New Year's. And so that became like a super crazy sacred day, because it was like, oh, it's New Year's for both calendars, and they would intersect at that moment. And that meant crazy fun. I'll talk about it later. So that's the calendar. Let's talk about the religion. So the Aztecs, again, did have elements that were truly their religion. And then they got a bunch from Teotihuacan. They got some stuff from the Maya. They got some stuff from the Toltecs. The Toltecs were 900 to 1100. That's what's in my head. But now I'm saying it. It's freaking me out. I'm probably wrong. It's in around 1100 AD. So yeah, I think that's right. 900 to 1100. So the Toltecs preceded the Aztecs, and they did a lot of the cultural and technological development in the Valley of Mexico. At the core of the Aztec religion was the belief that there was a god called Ometeotl, and Ometeotl was both male and female, and Ometeotl conceived of itself and created itself through its self-conception, and then triggers the creation of the universe in that moment. Then we end up with 4 creator gods. So the 4 creator gods are called the 4 Tezcatlapocas. So there is a red Tezcatlipoca, a white Tezcatlipoca, a black Tezcatlipoca, and a blue Tezcatlipoca. Those are the 4 creator gods. As the religion changes over time, the Tezcatlapocas become differentiated out as different gods. So they become Huitzilopochtli, he's the blue Tezcatlipoca. Huitzilopochtli, actually, Joey, let's put them up there and so we can get a visualization on the gods as they were represented. Huitzilopochtli is the left-handed hummingbird, god of war, and the sun. Just let that sink in for a moment. The left-handed hummingbird, god of war and the sun. Huitzilopochtli is the god of the south. He's the one I put at the bottom. He's the blue Tezcatlipoca. The god to the west, the god of the west, the god on the left in this, is Quetzalcoatl, probably the only god that anybody knows from the Aztecs. Quetzalcoatl is the white Tezcatlipoca. He's the god of life. His goal is to make humans and make us successful and make us thrive. From the beginning. He's totally obsessed with us. And he'll actually make multiple versions of us. I'll explain why in a sec. The god at the top, the god of the north, is Tezcatlipoca. Tezcatlipoca is the black Tezcatlipoca. He's the Tezcatlipoca that is the Tezcatlipoca. He's the god of smoking mirrors. So the Aztecs believe that when you looked into the mirror, you didn't really quite see yourself. That you were always sort of a mystery to yourself. That you were an unsolvable mystery. He's the god of things that are difficult to know. He's the god of darkness. He's the god of the night. He's the god of the mysterious. The god on the right is Xipitotec. He's the red Tezcatlipoca. Xipitotec gets me. He's the god that makes me a little nervous. He is red because he's flayed. He's the flayed god. He doesn't have any skin. And he's oftentimes depicted as wearing somebody else's skin because somebody else gets flayed in the process. He's the god of regeneration. He's the god of agriculture. He's the god of fertility. And he's scary. The other ones I love. That one freaks me out. So, these four gods decide with the other gods, because there's other gods. The pantheon is way bigger, but these are the four creator gods, they're the core of the Aztec religion. They decide that they want to create humans. That's Quetzalcoatl's goal. And they need to have a sun to fill the world with light. And so they make a sun. The first sun they actually make out of Tezcatlipoca. The problem is Tezcatlipoca is the god of darkness, so the sun they make is like really dark. It has hardly any glow, and they made the sun out of earth, out of dirt. And that probably also explains the lack of glow, and they get really frustrated. By the way, we were giants in that version. Quetzalcoatl made us as really big, tall beings, and long story short, who was it? I want to say it was Huitzilopochtli, but I probably have this remembered wrong. One of them, anyway, one of the gods knocks Tezcatlipoca from the sky. Since there's no sun, there's no way for the humans to survive, and then somebody at it, probably Quetzalcoatl, goes and slaughters the first version of us. They'll do 3 more suns. They do a water sun, an earth sun, and an air sun. That's it. Wait, earth, water, air. I'm having a COVID brain moment. Anyway, they do 4 more suns. None of them work. Or 3 more suns. None of them work. They hate them all. And they scrap all of them. They decide, okay, we need to try a 5th time. We'll get it right this time. This time we'll make humans that work and a sun that works. Making suns out of water didn't work. Making suns out of air didn't work. Let's try it one more time. So here's the plan they come up with. They get 2 gods to volunteer. Ooh, I feel like that was intended. They get 2 gods to volunteer. Nanahuatzin is one of the gods that volunteers. Nanahuatzin is sometimes called the god of syphilis, but he's always the god of sores. He's covered in boils. And the other god they get is a filthy rich god. He's the god of seashells. He's the god of wealth. And his name is Texistecatl. I'll say it again, Texistecatl, which when I hear, it sounds like somebody saying Texas Tecate. But anyway, Texistecatl. And what they do is they make a big bonfire. The gods make this massive bonfire. The idea is that Texistecatl is going to jump onto the bonfire, ignite himself, he'll rise up into the sky and become the sun, and then Nanahuatzin will go next. Texistecatl, he's arrogant, he's full of himself. He's self-absorbed, he's a narcissist. That's why he volunteers for this, because he thinks people will see his brilliant glory in the sky. He wants that. Nanahuatzin volunteers because he thinks it's his duty. He doesn't think highly of himself, he doesn't care about himself, he just thinks he's supposed to do it. It's the right thing to do. But when Texistecatl sees the flames in the bonfire and he realizes the amount of pain he's going to experience, he hesitates and he doesn't jump onto the bonfire. Instead, Nanahuatzin does. And when Nanahuatzin jumps onto the fire, he ignites and he rises up into the sky as the sun. Texistecatl hesitates, The gods are ashamed at him for doing this. They grab him, they throw him on the fire, and as he's igniting and rising, they begin beating him. And as they're beating him, they're snuffing out the flame and leaving bruise marks all over him. And that's why the moon looks like it does. And he becomes the moon. But there's a huge, massive problem. And the problem is that Nana Watson, the god of sores, the god of syphilis, this sick god, is the god who became the sun. And once he's in the sky, he refuses to move. And Quetzalcoatl is trying to figure out what he has to do to get the sun to move. And then he goes to the other gods and he goes, can't just be those two gods who get sacrificed to make the world, to make humans. Y'all got to be sacrificed too. And he cuts out the hearts of all the gods in a sacrifice to Nana Watson. And that's how the sun begins to move. Isn't that cool? And that's the fifth sun. We're in the age of the fifth sun. The Aztecs believe that, like the other four ages, this one too will end in catastrophe. It's really interesting when you think about it, because the Lakota believe that this age will end in catastrophe too, and so does Christianity. And just about every religion has some end point. There's going to be a termination point. Even science says it. We're so stupid, we're going to take ourselves out. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that point out there. So this is the core of the religion for the Aztecs. All right, so can I get you to put it back on the Valley of Mexico map? So now let's talk about the Aztecs themselves, the Mexica. The Mexica, according to their own legend, came from the north and entered into the Valley of Mexico. So we don't know what they mean by the north, because do they mean Canada? Do they mean Texas? Do they mean the Durango in Colorado or the Durango in Mexico? That's all to the north of the Valley of Mexico. It could be any of them. No, the Valley of Mexico, not the Aztec Empire. But okay, that one, perfect. So, where they originally go, there it is. Okay, so see where it says Chapultepec? So it's towards the left, it's near the star in the middle. The star in the middle of the lake. Or not in the middle of the lake, on the left-hand side of the lake. Chapultepec. I see people sometimes say Chapultepec Hill. You don't have to say that. Chapultepec means Grasshopper Hill. So if you say Chapultepec Hill, you're saying Grasshopper Hill. Now, you're like, no, but it sounds good. Keep saying it. We do this anyway. Like Michigan, Lake Michigan, Michigami. It's the Ojibwe word for big lake. So when you say Lake Michigan, you're literally saying Lake, Big Lake. So I guess, why not? Brought to you by the Department of Redundancy Department. The Aztecs, according to the stories that we have, so some of this may not be completely accurate, but it's probably basically accurate. They migrate into the valley and they go to Chapultepec where they settle. To the north, see it says Tlacopan, and then above that it says Azcapotzalco. They make contact with Azcapotzalco and they basically pledge their allegiance to Azcapotzalco. Azcapotzalco has become a regional power, a regional superpower in the Valley of Mexico. So as long as they're kind of in the good graces of Azcapotzalco, things are okay. And then things go sideways, and the Aztecs get attacked and driven off of Chapultepec, and they end up going in a migration around the southern end of the lake until they get, see where it says Culhuacan? It's actually, you got to go all the way down and then back onto that peninsula that basically divides the southern parts of the lake from the middle part of the lake. They go to Culhuacan. And when they get to Culhuacan, they go to the king of Culhuacan. And they go, we are refugees. We've been migrating for who knows how many years. Will you give us a piece of land to settle? And the Culhuacan decides, yeah, sure, we'll give you this tract of land. It was a really crappy piece of land, poor agricultural output, and the Aztecs are barely scraping a living off of it. The priesthood is furious about this because they don't want this to be the end of the Aztecs, that they're stuck as this permanent refugee population in this really crappy piece of land. So the priesthood, after a few years, comes up with a way to motivate the people. Because the priesthood goes to the people and they go, no, let's move. And the people are like, no, we're sick of moving. Everywhere we go, we get attacked. Everybody hates our guts. We're just stuck in this permanent refugee status. We're done with this. It's a crappy piece of land, but we can barely eke out a living, and that's good enough. And the priesthood's like, no, this is not working for us. We got you. So I don't know how the priesthood pulls this off, but they go on the coast and they get a bunch of boats and they just pull them ashore and just line them up. So there's a bunch of boats on the shore. They go to the king of Culhuacan and they go, we want to honor you because you have been so good to our people. We're desperate, and through kindness, you gave us a chunk of land so that we could have a place. And we can think of no better way to honor you than to honor your daughter, the princess. Would you give her to us so that we can put her into a beautiful religious ceremony to honor you? And the king goes, yes. And he gives them the princess. So if there's no lesson you get out of this lecture other than this one, I think this is the take home. If your daughter is going to be honored, always ask which God first. Just so we're clear. Don't go with yes. Ask questions. Which God did you have in mind again? Because it turns out the priesthood had Hippitotec in mind. Remember the god I told you creeped me out? The god of the east, the flayed god, the red god, the red Tezcatlipoca. I usually wear a red shirt. I couldn't wear it to today's lecture, but I love Huitzilopochtli, so I went with blue. He's the blue Tezcatlipoca. It worked out great. But red, there was no way, not Hippitotec. It's too much. I have a limit. So what the priest did was, they take the princess and they cut right here, and they go around the base of the neck, and then they split partway down her chest and very carefully peel her skin off so it comes out in one piece, alive. And then, as she's writhing in pain, they had one of the priests put her skin on, like Hippitotec, the flayed god. And then they start the ceremony. The king is in the audience waiting to see the ceremony, and the priest jumps out with the daughter's skin on, and the king freaks out, of course, and orders that all the Aztecs be slaughtered right then and there. The Aztecs didn't know what the priesthood was up to. The next thing they know, they're running, but they're on a peninsula. They're just running because they're scared. There's nowhere to go. They're running to the lake. And when they get to the lake, they see a bunch of priests standing by the boats going, get in. And the people get in, and they start rowing, and they row north to where the star is. When they get to that island, the priests had already told them about a prophecy. Long time earlier, like way back when. And the prophecy was that the last place they were supposed to settle, the place where they were never supposed to move again, was a place where they found an eagle standing on a cactus eating a rattlesnake. Which of course is the symbol in the center of Mexico's flag today. And they get to this island where the star is, and what do they see? An eagle standing on a cactus eating a rattlesnake. And the priests go, this is it. This is our spot. and they unload the people onto the island. They then immediately send word to Azcapotzalco. They sent a delegation, they send an embassy to Azcapotzalco, because by this point, Azcapotzalco is actually building an empire, the Tepenac Empire. And they are actually conquering whole swaths of the Valley of Mexico. And they tell them, we're ready to be your vassals. We're good. You're our rulers. We submit to you instantaneously. Of course, they fail to tell them, because Culhuacan is hunting us and they're going to slaughter us if they ever catch us. We need your protection. But once they have Azcapotzalco's protection, there's nothing Culhuacan can do. And now they've made themselves stable. So, the next part may be legend. The next part is that they get a Tlatoani. The whole thing might be legend anyway. A Tlatoani means speaker. They get a speaker. The first speaker of the Aztecs is a man named Tenoch. And Tenoch rules, according to the Aztecs, for a few decades. And that's what the city is going to be named after that gets founded on the island. It becomes named Tenochtitlan. So if you've ever heard Tenochtitlan, it's named after the first Tlatoani, the first ruler of the Aztecs, Tenoch. Tenoch is basically just trying to stabilize his population. There's no ambition here. They're just trying to figure out what they're going to do. Because the island might have been good to get them away from Culhuacan, but there's not much going on the island in the middle of a saltwater lake. There is fresh water if you dig wells in the middle of the island. On the edges of the island, you're going to hit salt water, but in the middle, you will hit fresh water. So they have access to some fresh water, but it's not like this is an agricultural hub. They're in trouble. They've picked a kind of crappy spot to settle. And that turned out to be genius, because it means they're going to have to figure out they're going to have to innovate how to get around the fact that they don't have a lot of fresh water and they don't have good agricultural land. And here's what they come up with. They declare, we're a fiefdom basically of Azcapotzalco. We're vassal state to them. But we're declaring our neutrality. And we're going to build a marketplace here. It turns out, throughout the entirety of the human experience, that enemies at war with each other still benefit from trading with each other. I'll give you my favorite example. Henry Ford, that Nazi, I'm not being sarcastic, he really was a Nazi. Hitler actually gave him a medal for being such a good Nazi. So the next time you're at the store buying a Ford, and then you're looking at a Volkswagen, just remember they were both made by Nazis. You can pick your Nazi mobile, you got two choices. Full disclosure, my grandfather owned a lumber mill and lumbered trees for the Ford Motor Company. So I am a beneficiary of a Nazi. Anyway, I didn't get any inheritance from my grandfather. I got cut out of the inheritance because I'm the black sheep of the family. So I didn't really benefit from my grandfather, but you know what I mean. Like I have a link to Ford, even if it's not beneficial to me. So Henry Ford sold trucks to the German military until December 1944. And so for those of you who went to public school in the United States, Pearl Harbor was December 1941. In other words, for 3 years after the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor, one of the main transportation vehicles for the Germans was a Ford truck. Now, you're like, well, how did he get the money? Switzerland. Switzerland was neutral. The Germans would just take the money and run it through Swiss banks, and that's how they could get the money to Henry Ford. Don't worry. Where there's greed, there's a way. You can make this happen. So what happened was, Tenochtitlan became the Switzerland of the Valley of Mexico. It declared itself to be neutral, like Switzerland, and then said, you need to trade? Come here and do it. We're setting up a marketplace, and anybody who needs to trade with anybody, no questions asked ever, can come here and safely trade because we will not allow any conflicts on the island. And then they took it up a notch. They created official state weights and measures. And then they deployed a police force into the marketplace that had official weights and the scale. If you thought somebody was cheating you because they had fake weights, right? Their weights were too light. So when they weighed your good that you were selling them, it showed as too light and you were paying you less, or they were too heavy because they were selling you the goods, right? And they were trying to cheat you. You could call the police over, and the police would whip out their scale and they take the official weights and they weigh that merchant's weights against their weights. And if the merchant was cheating you because they had fake weights, the Aztec police carried a sword with them, and they executed the merchant right then and right there in front of everybody. Now, sword, I have to explain. The Aztec sword, the Mesoamerican sword, was a piece of wood that looked like a baseball bat, but squished. So it's not round, it's flat, but it's got that kind of thickness to it. And then what they did, it was wood. Then what they did was they took obsidian. So the Aztecs had metal. They had copper and they had gold, they had silver. They could do metal, but they preferred obsidian for weapon purposes. So obsidian is volcanic glass. It's a fantastic material. Because when you take a stone and you smack it against obsidian, you can flake pieces off and you can make any shape you want. But it makes sharp edges, really nice sharp edges. It's glass. You've been cut by glass before. It's fantastic cutting for cutting purposes. And, right, it's a really durable substance. It breaks over time, but metal dulls over time. So if I make a sword out of steel and I'm banging somebody with it in combat, eventually I'm going to have to sharpen my sword because I'm going to dull it. Well, with obsidian, you take little chunks of obsidian and you jam it into the edges of the bat. So it's ringed by these pieces of obsidian. When obsidian breaks, it makes a new sharp edge. So as my obsidian's breaking, I still have a sharp edge. I'll eventually have to replace my obsidian because I'll eventually have broken too much of it. But at least I always have a sharp edge. Whereas with steel, eventually it's dull, and I'm like killing the guy with a spoon. It's evil, actually, when you think about it. But what you would do with the sword is you would strike and then hit the spot you want, like, say, the side of a person's neck. Once you're there, that hurts because the obsidian is now gone into the side. But because it's rounded pieces on the edge, as you pull back, it's like a chainsaw. Each piece going ding, 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 ding. It's a very effective weapon. Very cool. Now, here's the twist. If the weights weren't wrong, you died. In other words, you call the cops over, someone is dying. Don't call the cops unless you're really sure. And what that did was that made it so everybody knew the Aztec marketplace was a place where you could do business and not have to worry too much about being swindled. Notice I said not too much, because it turns out people still cheated. So there were 4 currencies for the Aztecs. One currency was a piece of copper shaped like a mushroom. So it wasn't a squished coin, it was like a 3-dimensional mushroom that they had, and they would exchange that. That was a currency, it was a legitimate currency. Another currency was corn. You could just take corn seed and you could trade it in sacks. Another currency was bolts of cotton. The Aztecs had cotton cloth, the greatest fabric on earth. Silk and linen might be better in terms of comfort, but, well, silk is really amazing. You can make armor out of silk, but it's super expensive. The Mongols, totally derailing the topic now, they had silk armor. When an arrow would hit, because silk is such a strong material, the arrow couldn't cut the silk. So what it would do is it would drive the silk into your body in front of the arrow. So when you wanted to pull the arrow out, you just grabbed a fistful of the silk and you could pull the arrow out. And it could only penetrate so far because the silk would stop it from going any deeper. Isn't that cool? Anyway, so okay, they didn't have silk, they had cotton though. And cotton's an amazing material. You can make lots of different variations of clothing out of it. It's relatively light. Like compared to wool is garbage. Like no human being would intentionally wear wool. Anyway, I'm wearing wool because it's a fashion statement. I don't know, I feel trapped by my wool. It's just how it is though. It's male oppression. All right, so, because have you noticed, like women can just basically, if I was a woman, I could be dressed like anything, but as a guy, I have a uniform. And every guy has to wear the same stupid wool uniform. No, it's true. Anyway, it's good though, because it's easy. I go to my wardrobe and I have 6 different black suits. And I just pick my favorite black suit for that moment. And I put that one on. Which one should I wear today? I know it's like dark gray, not actually black, but in my mind it's black because that's my favorite color. All right, so that's the marketplace. Now, there is a twist. I didn't tell you about the fourth currency. The fourth currency was cocoa beans, as in hot chocolate. The favorite Aztec non-alcoholic beverage. The Aztecs had 17 different alcoholic beverages. They were definitely into alcohol. It's actually one of my favorite little points to stop and pause and contemplate for a moment. You know how you were taught that BS in school about one of the reasons why the Native Americans all ended up as alcoholics was because we brought alcohol with, but they didn't have it? Monkeys have alcohol. That's the dumbest thing ever. No, literally, monkeys will wait until fruit over-ripens and starts to ferment, and then they'll go get it. And they'll literally get drunk off of it. And by the way, they will trade fruit for sex. So it's just like us. We're like drunk, falling over each other, getting into fist fights, falling out of branches, eating rotten fruit. It's perfect. In other words, the Native Americans had alcohol because we've had alcohol for at least 20 million years. We had alcohol before we had fire and ate meat. This is not something new to our species. So the idea that somehow alcohol came here and corrupted Native Americans is nonsense. The Aztecs had 17 different ways to make alcoholic beverages. Anyway, cocoa got turned into a drink. And the Aztecs really loved that cocoa drink. Somebody loved it so much, we have actually found, archaeologists have dug up counterfeit cocoa beans. If that person had been found out, they would have been executed. What they did was, they took the cocoa bean, they took some kind of sharp device, they cut it, and then they took a very small device and slowly scooped the cocoa out, and then they put sand in and stitched it closed and dropped it in a sack of cocoa beans and used it as currency and had it weighed, which meant they were facing death penalty if they got caught. That's how much they wanted to drink cocoa that day. It is a good drink. I'm totally on board. I'm just not sure the death penalty part makes a lot of sense to me. Like risking, I could die, or I could and have cocoa, or I could just not have cocoa today and not risk dying. I don't know. I don't really speed much either, so I'm probably, like if I'm gonna do something risky, I want it to involve like saying something to the wrong person. You know what I mean? Or or climbing on the side of a cliff with faulty equipment. You know what I mean? I want it to be that kind of adrenaline situation, but maybe I'm too picky. So that's the marketplace. I need you to have this thing where it's bustling, lots of action, there's people trading and bartering and selling, and there are these scary-ass police walking around with their hand on their sword waiting for somebody to call them over. In the middle of this, they had a problem that they had to solve. And it was they didn't have enough fresh water to do this, because all these people are coming to their town and they got to give them fluid intake, right? Because they'll die of dehydration if they don't. So they needed to get water to the island. Initially, they just went and made boats, and they would go get fresh water and they would haul it to the island. But that's not only labor intensive, it's incredibly inefficient. But they were also making boats because they began trading by taking the goods to other towns. And so little by little, the Aztecs are actually building a navy in this lake. The navy, of course, was mostly for merchant purposes, but water purposes, and to solve another problem that the Aztecs had. What do you do with all the human waste being generated? Because there's garbage, for one thing, being generated, but there's also fecal matter and urine being generated, and you really don't want that just hanging out in your town. You need to get rid of it. This isn't Paris, right? This isn't Europe, where they just threw it in the street. The Aztecs were clean. This is disgusting. They got to get rid of it. So what they did was they actually had guys come by. You would put it in your chamber pot. They'd have guys come by, and they would haul it off in boats, because then they could take it to farmland and then turn it into fertilizer. And so in this way, they could get the waste away from the city and fertilize farms in the process. Eventually, they get rich enough. See how there's 3 red lines going to the star, and they're labeled 1, 2, 3? They get rich enough, they actually build 3 causeways, not at the same time, but they will eventually end up with 3 causeways. They literally just pile rocks and dirt into the lake. It's not a bridge. It's a causeway. They've cut the lake with an earthen barrier, and then they ran a pipe from the mountains through the causeway and brought fresh water to the city through the causeway. So now you can walk to the island, because it's not an island really anymore, and fresh water is coming to the island. So they solved 2 problems at once. Not everybody has to get there by boat anymore. And as they're developing trust and wealth and a navy, there's cities expanding because people are moving there, because there's jobs there. The marketplace is really successful. They're getting some wealth going. Tenoch is replaced by Akamapichli. He's the second Tlatoani. He's replaced by Huitzlahuitl. Huitzlahuitl manages to marry Tezozomoc's daughter. Tezozomoc is the ruler of Azcapotzalco, the guy who's in charge of the Tepenac Empire. And the way Huitzlahuitl is thinking is, if I can marry this guy's daughter, it's now linked us permanently to the superpower in the region. It not only protects us, maybe we'll start to become part of it and we'll get a share. When he dies, his son takes over, Chimalpopoca. Chimalpopoca's rule is a little awkward, in part because Tezozomoc, his grandfather, is slowly working his way to the exit. Tezozomoc ruled for like 60 years. And so by the time that Chimalpopoca is the Tlatoani of the Mexica, Tezozomoc is old, and he's on his way out. So here, I'm going to tell you the official story, and then I'm going to tell you the unofficial story. So the official story is, when Tezozomoc dies in 1426, there's a power struggle in the Tepenac Empire, because everybody's jockeying to become the next Tlatoani of Azcapotzalco and to take over. And the Aztecs try to figure out which side to join, and maybe they pick the wrong side. And that side loses. When it becomes clear to Chimalpopoca that his side is lost, he decides to sacrifice himself. He's going to sacrifice himself to the gods, but his cabinet goes first. Wouldn't this be something? Like the president gets up in front of the country and goes, "We've decided, my cabinet and I, that we're going to kill ourselves. Well, we're going to have priests kill us. And I'm going to have the Secretary of State go first, and I'm going to stand here in line and make sure the whole cabinet goes, and then I'm going." That would have been something. Anyway, that's what they decide to do. Because Chimalpopoca knows it's lost, it's over, he needs to go out in a blaze of glory. He can please the gods, and maybe in the process he can save the Aztecs. Because they picked the wrong side. Don't pick the wrong side. His whole government has just been sacrificed. There is a god, Chalk, and there's a Chalk Mall. It's a statue. So if you've ever been to a Maya ruin, you've seen it, you just may not have noticed it. There's a statue of a god reclining. He's got his knees bent, and then he's got his elbows out. So his body is kind of bent forward, so he's shaped like this, and his head is up. And what they would do is they would take you, they would set you on Chalk Mall, so your back is against his chest. So he's kind of like holding you in an embrace, and your knees are bent over his knees. And then they would have priests pull your hands back, your arms back, so you're pinned. Another priest could hold your head down. And then two other priests would grab you by the feet. And then another priest comes with a obsidian blade. And it goes in between the ribs, twist to pry the ribs open, reach in, pull the beating heart out, cut it. The priests take a bite of the heart, chop off the head. You spike the head on a stake, and then you take the corpse and you throw it down the stairs. That's what was supposed to happen. Chimalpopoca is next. The whole area is bloody, so it's slippery, so everybody's slipping and sliding, because his Secretary of State is gone, his Secretary of the Interior is gone, his Agriculture Secretary, you know what I mean, the Attorney General, they've all been zapped. Timing is everything. The forces that had prevailed in Azcapotzalco have arrived. They capture him right before the priests get him on Chalk Mall. They haul him off and throw him in prison. And that's what happens to the fourth Tlatoani of the Aztecs. Maybe. There's another possibility, and that possibility is that something else took place, that his uncle, Itzcoatl, did a coup d'etat and took him out and then made up this story and fronted it as the official story, but it didn't happen. I don't have an opinion. I like both stories a lot. I kind of like the idea of, you're like ready to go and you just get captured and you can't. They kill him in custody. Itzcoatl becomes the next Tlatoani. He's the fifth Tlatoani, 1427. Itzcoatl wants nothing to do with being the vassal state of Azcapotzalco. So what he does, just south of Azcapotzalco is Tlacopan. He goes and he meets with the Tlacopan ruler, and then he crosses the lake over to where it says Texcoco, the town the lake is named after, on the east side. And when he gets to Texcoco, he makes a deal with Tlacopan and Texcoco. Here's the deal. Together, the three are going to create a new empire to replace Azcapotzalco. Texcoco will get 2/5. Tenochtitlan, eventually Tlatelolco, is it on that map? It is. See where it says Mexico, Tlatelolco? That was the neighboring island. Eventually the two islands physically merged and politically merged. So it eventually becomes one island, one city. And so Tenochtitlan Tlatelolco is the full name. That's why I almost said Tenochtitlan Tlatelolco. Tenochtitlan Tlatelolco will get 2/5, and then Tlacopan will get 1/5. They work together. They basically take out Azcapotzalco. They conquer the Valley of Mexico, and they actually send armies out and start conquering some of the surrounding territory. The Aztec Empire is founded with Itzcoatl. Itzcoatl took over in 1427, so it's almost right away. This is the birth of the Aztec Empire. But it's not an empire in the sense that it's a partnership with two other guys where the Aztecs don't even have 50%, they have 40%. Texcoco has 40%. So in a way, the Aztecs are actually equals with their partners, right? They're more powerful than Tlacopan. They were like the Ringo Starr in the band. You know what I mean? Just mistreated, undervalued. After Itzcoatl is Moctezuma the first. Moctezuma the second, when he makes contact with the Spaniards, they hear Montezuma. So Moctezuma, the Spaniards called Montezuma. But this is the first. They haven't had contact yet. Moctezuma massively expands the empire at this point. He's followed up by Axayacatl, who also expands the empire a lot. Tizoc doesn't do much. He does a little bit. And then Tizoc's brother, Ahuitzotl, is going to do a big, massive expansion. We don't know which guy did it. It was either Tizoc or Ahuitzotl. One of those Tlatoani took the name Hui Tlatoani. Hui meant great. At that moment, it was a way of making it clear that this was no longer a real partnership with Texcoco and Tlacopan. This was now the Aztec Empire, and it really was Tenochtitlan Tlatelolco in charge. So that's the moment when the Aztecs are really just running the show on their own. After Ahuitzotl, who does the massive expansion. By the way, just as a aside, just as a weird aside, Ahuitzotl gets credited as the first person in recorded history. There might have been somebody who did this somewhere else at a different time, but this is the first recorded case of this where he took a bird species from one place and introduced it to another place. He brought grackles to the Valley of Mexico for some reason. And so that's that guy. Anyway, he gets replaced by Moctezuma the second, as in the guy Cortez makes contact with. That's how brief the Aztec Empire is. Right? Moctezuma the second is the 10th Tlatoani. They only had 12. Cuitlahuac, the 11th, was Tlatoani for like 80 days. Like, you don't even need to remember his name, except you just want to show off and say, look, I know number 11. And then Cuauhtémoc is the last. So, I've done the sacrifice thing. You've seen it a little bit in your mind. But I want to point something out that's really interesting. I've just been telling you about how they start conquering the Valley of Mexico, and eventually they conquered that area in the other map that was kind of reddish-orange, big chunk of land. The Aztecs believed it was unethical, it was immoral, it was against the gods to kill in warfare. When the Aztecs went into warfare, they went unarmed. The Aztec army was a wrestler army. So here's how this worked. So let's say I live in Tenochtitlan, I'm an Aztec, and you are too. So I'm putting you in Tenochtitlan. The city was a grid. The streets were straight. So it's just a grid city. Inside each block was a single building, and in the middle of the building was a courtyard, and each block had an extended family in it. The blocks were called calpulis. Each calpuli had its own specialization. So there's the calpuli that does seashell jewelry, the calpuli that does jade jewelry, the calpuli that makes obsidian blades, the calpuli that does leather work, the calpuli that does woodwork, right? Each calpuli had its specialization. So what am I in the mood for? Let's be jade jewelers. That sounds cool. So that's what we do in our Kalpuli. It's time for war. So we've been called upon, each Kalpuli is called upon to produce a certain number of warriors. So let's say it's you and me. We're going to be two of the people who are selected by the Kalpuli. The Kalpuli elders get together and they picked us. And then a group of other people too. But we need to be paired up. Everybody got paired up. So you and me were paired up. We go, we do our training. It's a bunch of wrestling. We're boys. We've been wrestling our whole lives. That's what boys do. We punch each other in the face and we wrestle. So it's not like this is going to be that different. The big difference is, part of the training is trying to figure out how to disarm a guy with a sword trying to kill you with it. Because think about it, I'm unarmed, but they're not. So we line up for battle. I'm standing there. In fact, let's do the Aztec Empire map, the one with all the provinces on it. Because then I can show you the last place they conquered. And I can also tell you why they never conquered the Tlaxcalano. So the last place they conquered, do you see where it says Tlaxcala Confederacy? It's one of the orange pockets. Underneath that, there's a little red dot. It's probably too far away for you to read. That's the town of Cholula. And of course, the Valley of Mexico is where the lake is, to the west of that. Cholula is the last place the Aztecs conquered. So, all right, let's say that's what we're doing. We're there. It's 1519. It might have been 1518 when they conquered it. It's right at the end, right at the apocalypse, with Cortez arriving. So we go, we're lined up. Well, one of us is going to go first, because the rule is we're going to wrestle, but it has to be one-on-one. There's no cheating. The Aztecs believed there were rules to combat, and you would upset the gods if you cheated. So let's say I get to go first. So you're my partner. You stand behind me. You've got rope. I don't have a rope. I don't have anything on me. Well, the guy I'm going to go up against is going to have something. He's going to have a spear or a sword. You know what I mean? Like, he's got a weapon. I'm coming at him. And so the first part I got to do, if he has a spear, right? If I charge at him, he just sticks me in the gut. Like, this is going to be a short battle. I got to be careful. So I got to work my way through careful maneuvering to get past the tip of his spear. Because once I'm past the tip, all he can do is bang me with the shaft. If it's the sword, there's no getting past the damn thing. It's right. He's just got it. Anyway, my goal is to somehow get past his weapon without getting stuck or slashed, and then either disarm him or at least get him on the ground and then pin him. Once I've pinned him, then my partner can come in. The partner comes in with the rope. We start tying up the guy I pinned. I can keep him down while my partner ties him up. Once we've got the guy tied up, we lift him up, we carry him back behind our lines, and we drop him off with all the other prisoners. Now we switch places. I become the assistant. I've got the rope. You go. You walk up. You try to get around the weapon. It's there. You get past it, let's say. And you capture the guy. You pin him. I run up, help you tie them up. We take them back behind the line. We're done. That's it. That was all that was on us. As soon as you captured one person, you didn't have to fight anymore. The battle's over. Unless you want to. So now, we're going to have a conversation. Because do you want to go again? I do. I'm an adrenaline junkie. This is perfect for me. For the first time in my life, I'm getting dopamine. I hate making jade jewelry. It's so boring. If I die in battle, this is okay. You're like, I like jade jewelry. I'm not doing this. But then you can still be my assistant. So I'm going to go again. And then let's say I'm successful. Well, by this point, I'm probably kind of beat up and really tired, right? Because there's this guy trying to kill me, and I've probably got cuts on me from this and bruises from the wrestling. And when I was pinning the guy, he's probably punching me and kicking me and biting me, you know what I mean? Because he doesn't want to get captured. You'll see why in a little bit. So, if I go that third time, I'm probably already beat up. Most people probably aren't going to go a third time. But I'm a dumbass, let's say, and I go that third time. It's on the table. I can go 3 times if I want to. If I pin a third captive, if I get a third captive in a single battle, I become a knight. If I become a knight, I get to move out of my Kalpuli and I move into the Hui Tlatoani's Kalpuli. And that means my children can get public schooling. The Aztecs had public schools for the children of the knights. And if they get public schooling, it means they won't be making jade. They're going to become government bureaucrats, which of course came with a great retirement plan and lots of avenues for corruption. Isn't that cool? Okay, after we're done conquering Kalpuli, having killed conquering Cholula, having killed none of the Cholulans, although they probably killed a bunch of us, because you just got to figure a bunch of unarmed guys up against spears and swords. I bet a lot of us went down. After we're done, we line up the prisoners. And then the priests come. And they select out some of the prisoners. The prisoners who weren't selected out are released. And now conquered Cholula is absorbed into the Aztec Empire. It's done. But the prisoners who were selected out get to come home with us. So, let's say your prisoner was selected. And then let's just make me be that prisoner. Okay, so here's what happens. I'm going to go back with you, back to Tenochtitlan, Tlatelolco, and move into your Kalpuli. And I become a duplicate you. I'm going to do everything you do. So you do jade, I'm going to do jade. You're going to have to teach me because maybe I was a fisherman. You know what I mean? Like, maybe I was a farmer. But that's what's going to happen. I become you. You're going to go hang out with your friends. I get to go hang out with your friends with you. You're going to go drinking. I go drinking with you. You go out whoring. I go out whoring with you. I am you. At dinner time, I go sit next to you. I'm like your little shadow. All the religious ceremonies, we go together. If I don't speak Nahuatl, you teach me. You teach me the ceremonies. You teach me the religion. Whatever I need to be taught to become another you. We live together. I sleep in your bedroom for a year. We're going to live together for 360 days because they were missing the 5.24 days. And then on the 360th day, the anniversary celebration of the conquest of Cholula, the night before, we're going to get crazy drunk together. I mean, like we're puking our guts up drunk. And you went to the marketplace and bought me a special mushroom. Because after you've lived with the person for a year, there's no way you don't have some affinity and attachment for that person. And then what you're going to do is you're going to give me the mushroom in the morning. So I am, it's like the 60s. And then at the appropriate time, all the warriors with all the captives step out of the Kalpulis into the street, and they begin a dancing ceremony heading to the Temple of the Sun. And when we get to the base of the Temple of the Sun, you're going to turn to me and go, I love you like a brother. And I'm going to say, same thing. You're going to hug me, and you're going to separate off. You're not leaving. You're going to wait for me because you're not going to abandon me. We're too close. And I'm going to run up that pyramid. Now, that's hard to do because there's blood all over it. So I'm slipping and sliding, but I'm going to get up there as fast as I can because that's part of the ceremony. And when I get up to the top there are going to be these really nice priests. They're going to help me get onto this reclining god Some of them are going to hold me down while another priest comes with that obsidian blade and sticks it in my chest, twists the blade, pulls out my beating heart, cuts it off. Everybody takes a bite. I'm decapitated. My head is spiked. My corpse is then thrown down the steps of the temple. Boom, 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 boom. Where you're waiting for me, you pick up my corpse and you head back to the Kalpuli, where you lay it down in the kitchen. And then I will be turned into stew. And when it's time to eat the stew, you'll stand up and you will say, I cannot eat myself, and you will leave. And then your father will stand up and he will say, I cannot eat my son, and he will leave. But everybody else will have Roy's stew. Now, I know you're disgusted and you're freaked out. But really, you are disgusted and you're freaked out? Compare this to the warfare we do, where we're slaughtering whole cities. We're bombing cities from the air. We're shooting people in the stomach with lead bullets. We're doing gas chambers. Shut up. A small select number of Chilulans got sacrificed and eaten. Now, the eaten part is weird. Rebecca's story counted the number of heads. No, her ancestor counted the number of heads when her ancestor was there with Cortez in Tenochtitlan, Tlatelolco. And based on that, based on what we think the average size of an Aztec was, it was probably about a pound of human flesh consumed per person over the course of a year. In other words, 4 quarter-pounders over the course of a year. We think that actually was necessary because there's no domesticated animals. The Aztecs didn't have cows. They didn't have sheep. They didn't have chicken. By the time the Aztec Empire was functioning, the fish in the lake were gone. In fact, there was a black line in the previous map. The Aztecs built a dam because they figured out something. The southern part of the lake was less saline than the northern part of the lake. So they went and they did the math in their heads and they went, what if we cut a dam across the lake and split it into 2 parts? What would happen? They turned the southern part of the lake into a freshwater lake. The northern part of the lake was a saltwater lake. It dramatically increased their agriculture output. They were producing so much corn, squash, and beans that the Aztec Empire reached 35 million people. The Valley of Mexico reached 8 million people. Today, the Valley of Mexico is probably, 25 million people? Mexico today is 125 million people? The Aztec Empire covered, 15% of Mexico and had a 35 million person population at a time when there was 500 million people on the planet? 500 million times 16 is 8 billion. That's what we have today. The population of the planet has increased by 16-fold. But Mexico's population has increased by 3 times? In other words, the Aztecs sustained a population that was appropriate for 1920s, 1930s. They had the most sophisticated agriculture system on the planet at the time. When Cortez comes up over the valley and looks down in it, he is looking at the most densely populated place on earth. It was more populated than China, India, Egypt, anywhere else. In other words, Hippitotec is upsetting, and the sacrifices were upsetting. I don't want to whitewash that. It freaks me out. I told you I couldn't wear red because he gets me. But compared to the psychotic, cruel, brutal stuff we do on a daily basis with the Russians doing human waves into the Ukrainians right now, with the concentration camps all across the planet right now, I think the Aztecs were crazy ethical. especially when you consider the fact that they didn't have domesticated animals. So this was a way to get a little bit of animal protein into everybody's diet. There was an actual need, even if it was gross. And then, to make things more interesting, they rarely had conquered people uprisings. Now, there's probably two reasons for that. One, they banned the production of cotton inside the Valley of Mexico. So all the cotton was produced outside. Only food was produced inside the valley. So if you did an uprising, you didn't have enough food because you were reliant on the valley's food. So you had to do the math before you were willing to do that. But the other reason that maybe there weren't many uprisings was because of the magic in the symbolism of this person being turned into an Aztec before they were eaten. Right? In my little scenario, I became an Aztec. I learned the language if I didn't know it already. I learned your trade. I learned how to navigate the streets. I slept with the same prostitutes. I drank the same alcoholic drinks. I worshiped the same gods for a year. And then I got eaten. I got literally absorbed into the body Aztec. And for a fraction the cost of lives that the Spanish, for example, will do. So, we don't have time to get into the conquest, which saddens me because I really wanted to do Cortez. I'll have to have a part 2, I guess. But I want to point this out. When Columbus landed in 1492, the low number, the conservative number, the number that's generous to white people number, was 140 million people living in North and South America. 108 years later, 1600, the estimate was that it was 15 million. It went from 140 million to 15. Do the math, that's 125 million, but it's not, because that's 5 generations, right? If a generation's 20 years, that's 5 generations. So that means there were all these babies being produced that you still had to kill too to get rid of that population. So the real death toll was probably 150 million, 175 million. The Aztecs would have never done anything like that. Life was too precious to them. Quetzalcoatl is the god of life. They couldn't comprehend what the Spanish were doing because they couldn't believe it. Since I can't do the full lecture, I'll just tell you this. When the Spanish got to Cholula, they captured it from the Aztecs. And then they killed every single person in the city. The Aztecs went, "What are you doing? You murdered the children, you murdered the women, you murdered the prisoners. Who would do something like that? You are sociopaths." It shook them up. It shook them to the core. They had never seen such evil before. You know you suck when the people doing human sacrifice had never seen such evil before. And then eating the dude. The human sacrifice, and they ate him. And you're more evil. Anyway, I think we're out of time, which breaks my heart because I really wanted to give you Cortez. But next time. We'll do it sometime probably next year because this year is already scheduled out. It's too crazy. There's no way I can fit it in. All right, so I'll actually field a question and then we can go in case there is one. If there isn't, we can just go. Okay, so the question is, what was the thought process of the priests at Culhuacan when they murder the princess in the Xipitotec sacrifice? I think it was when they were trying to convince the people to move on their own, they wouldn't. So they thought, oh, we'll incentivize it by having Culhuacan attack us. But you know that priest that was standing there, he died. Like the priests that were at the front, they were probably all massacred. They willingly sacrificed themselves to make the Aztecs refugees again on purpose. I think that's what their motivation was. I don't think they thought they were dishonoring the princess in the process. So part of the religious system said that Nana Watson, the god of syphilis, the god of sores, the god that became the sun, had to have human blood sacrifice to stay in orbit. They believed that what they were doing is they were keeping the sun in orbit. And that if they didn't do this, the fifth age, the fifth sun would fail in it, and we would end into a cataclysm. And unlike the Abrahamic religions, which welcome the apocalypse, they want it to come, they didn't. They were like, no, this sounds terrible. What do you mean we're going to lose everything and we're all going to die? So they didn't ever think when they were doing a sacrifice that it was a waste. For the Aztecs, the only waste was to murder somebody in cold blood. That was terrible. They couldn't comprehend that. There had to be a purpose to it, which is, the exact opposite of our civilization, where we just randomly slaughter whole populations for no reason, including the Native Americans. Anyway, any other questions? All right. Well, thanks for coming. I hope I freaked you out just enough, and we'll see you next time.